The first is do your research. Cybersecurity is an expansive field, and we have those same decision points to make for a cybersecurity career. And I think it matters where you decide to start. Like if you know that you want to specialize in forensics, then you can start reaching out to other people that have that career field already, establish a mentor relationship, and get an idea of how you need to shape your skills to be successful.
Welcome to another episode of Zero to Exit. This is Neelima, your host. Our guest today has a very unique background. She was homeschooled, finished high school early, was a single teen mom, then went to military, and after many twists and turns, built up a stellar resume in the security industry. It is with great pleasure that I'd like to welcome Heather Gantt-Evans, Chief Information Security Officer at Sailpoint. For our listeners, Sailpoint is a leader in identity and access management. Heather has previously held leadership roles at Home Depot, EY, Booz Allen, and of course the US Army. She's also a board advisor at NoName Security and CyberStarts. Hi Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi Neelima, thanks so much for having me.
So we have plenty of ground to cover today, so I'm going to hit the ground running right away. Tell us how you got into security.
I was a teen mom, and so stability and having that financial independence was huge for my outlook with trying to think of what was the best future for me and my daughter. And so I actually joined the military to be able to pay for college. I started with an undergrad in sociology, right, which doesn't seem very technology centric, but I loved the critical thinking around social influences on people's decisions and all the writing that went with it. But then I thought to myself, I really need to be strategic about what field I get into. And so I did some research and decided to conquer a fear and dive into technology because I didn't really have a background of being highly interested in technology as a child. And so I went for a master's program in technology management and immediately got picked up by Booz Allen Hamilton to help as an IT business analyst for a government contract with the Air Force. They ended up having a different position come available for Air Force Cyber Command. And they said, hey, this is a cyber threat intelligence analyst position. And you went to the Army and learned how to be an all source threat intel analyst. And then you have a background in technology management with your master's program. Maybe you can figure this out. And so they gave me a shot. And that was how I first got into cybersecurity.
Awesome. So I want to double click a little bit into the technology piece. As you were evaluating like where to get into, how did you zero in on technology at that time? I mean, you had so many things going on in your life. Anything specific for our listeners?
Just that I knew that it was a really stable career field, that there was a lot of innovation always occurring in technology. And for that reason, we always need new talent in technology. And there was a shortage of people to fill jobs. And so I didn't want to get in a position where I graduated and then didn't have a job to land in. So that was really the big driver.
And how has that experience of your the education as well as the unique experience that you had about being a single mom, how has it helped you become a better leader?
Yeah, well, as a single mom, you definitely learn how to multitask. So you learn to be able to handle a lot of pressures and keep your cool because, your children need that. And then also, I graduated early from high school, and a lot of that was because I didn't have the best experience in high school. You deal with a lot of kids in high school that are excluders. They don't make you feel welcome. And having gone from homeschool to a public high school, it was a very difficult transition. And so for me, the most important thing you can be as a leader is empathetic and encouraging, right? Make people feel included, make people feel supported. And then the military really taught me to uphold standards, right? Because the military has certain ways to do things. They really document to ensure no single point of failure and easy transitions and ensure we're all operating to the same standard. So I think that's also shaped my leadership style as well.
Yeah, great background, and definitely an inspiration for a lot of women and men who sort of rose through the rank and landed the top roles. As we look at your career, you've had multiple transitions. Have your career moves been sort of very intentional, or it just sort of happened by accident?
Yeah, I would say what has intentional about my career is always competing with myself to try to find
Mhm.
the next challenge, right? And being intentional about understanding the interconnectivity of different partner roles to my role. And so by focusing on that interconnectivity, it always gave me insight to things that I didn't know, right? I met a new partner. What do you do in your role in the business? What do you care about? What inputs and outputs do you need? And so by really reaching out to try to understand that, it helped me to kind of get a better picture of the overall organization and where I might be able to grow within an organization or within an industry. So that always caused me to kind of raise my hand and take on new challenges like, hey, I've been working with this role. I'd love to learn more about it. Can I do some shadowing there? Or can I take on a consulting engagement that allows me to dive a little bit deeper there? And so that was been intentional. What wasn't intentional was saying I want to be a CISO one day, right? Coming from a small town in Texas, I guess it wouldn't have been something that would have crossed my mind. It was really people who saw potential in me that ever even opened up the possibility for me to dream bigger about myself, if that makes sense.
Totally, it makes a lot of sense. And the raising the hand resonates a lot with me because I tend to do that a lot as well. But what I also hear a lot is the disparity between the salaries between men and women in the same position. What's been your experience, and do you have a first principle around that now that you have a big team yourself?
Well, first, I kind of wanted to share some good news. Recently, there was a report, and I can get it as a follow up, but IANS partnered with a recruiting firm to do a study on CISO salaries. And we've put a lot of emphasis in the technology and cybersecurity community on diversity and the importance of having diverse thought leadership throughout all ranks over the last couple decades at least. And I think one of the positive momentums we're seeing is that this report showed that female CISOs are earning in some cases more salary than men for in equal roles. And so that's huge progress, but there still is disparity across other roles, titles, and ranks. And I've definitely experienced that disparity firsthand. In fact, at one point, I had a male champion, I'll call him. He wasn't my direct manager, but he had insight into some disparity on my team. And he helped coach me say, hey, you need to know your worth in this position. And that was really impactful and gave me like the courage to start having more open dialogues with peers in industry and male champions about how I should handle those type of milestones in my career, such as salary negotiation.
So, knowing your worth, easier said than done. What advice would you give for the women listeners and even men who want to negotiate and get the best that they deserve? How do you kind of get your sense of what's your value to the organization?
Yeah, well, just like I was referencing that I was reading a report, I do try to read industry compensation reports when I get my hands on them, not just for myself, but to ensure I'm taking care of my team the right way. And then I also think it's important to look at open positions. It's become far more popular these days to include salary range on open positions to get an idea of if you're in that range for comparable roles. And then lastly, having those people that are trusted advisors in your network, like I said, men who are champions for you in your career, female peers, male peers, people that you can talk to and ask straightforward questions about salary and negotiations to, has been impactful in my career.
That's great to hear. I wanted to switch gears on security in a second, but before I do that, obviously post COVID, the women have been impacted the most in terms of job losses. They had to quit, take care of kids, etc. You are an incredible professional. You have three kids, etc. How do you manage the two? What advice would you have for women who want to come back to work and sort of manage this post COVID work from home, work and life kind of balance in today's world?
Yeah, well, I would say one, I'm blessed to have an amazing partner in life, right, who helps me out immensely. So I can't take all the credit of that. In fact, I think one of the most important things women do for their careers is pick their partner. My partner has supported my career quite a bit. And I think also another experience that I would draw from is that while I was with E&Y, for example, I was there 5 years. I took off a total of 9 months for two pregnancies and a major surgery. And I think another important question we as women need to ask is, what company culture am I sitting in? Because if you're in the right company culture, you can take that time that you need for yourself, whether it's work flexibility during the week to accommodate changes in kids' school schedules due to COVID, or whether it's taking leave, paid or unpaid, for whatever is going on in your life. That ability to come back and know that you're still going to be rewarded and acknowledged for your contributions and not have that held against you is completely a factor of the culture within the company. And there are company cultures out there that are incredibly supportive of the balance between work and life and the integration of work and life that we now see with COVID.
Yeah, good suggestions. It's hard to find those employers, but like increasingly, at least I see that employers have become more empathetic, especially post COVID, especially in big tech. And if there was one export from big tech to the rest of the enterprise in US, I think this would be one, being a little bit more empathetic to employees, because it does seem kind of nonstop in today's climate. Yeah, switching gear to security. Look, the CISOs have many priorities. There's always a new thing every year, every month. How do you think about your top priorities in your role?
Well, first, I think it's important to think about return on investment for how you spend your time. And so there's certain things in a CISO role, for example, that your team depends on you to exclusively do, like help set the strategy, do business outreach and help understand the business and where they're going, have those solid relationships to tackle roadblocks. And in cases like mine, where I'm working for a security vendor, help support customer facing engagements or help advise on the trajectory of the product, because I'm a target buyer for security products. So, kind of thinking through very holistically in a pie chart kind of way, like what percentage of my time should go to each of these types of activities, and then trying to hold yourself accountable to how you're spending your time. And then there's also, beyond prioritizing your own time, there's how do you go about prioritizing security in general, right? Because it seems like an endless battle of trying to apply controls and innovate. And so I think about that in a few ways. The first is I always prioritize the table stakes cyber hygiene. So things like locking down endpoints, ensuring you're patching, identity security, ensuring you have MFA, email security, and understanding your overall attack surface picture, because that's how the adversary is going to see it. Those things are must do's. Then I also think about prioritization in terms of coverage of controls within disparate environments, right? So different types of environments, I have different ownership levels and responsibilities for, and different levels of control. So, like on-prem environment, I have an immense amount of control over. Cloud, I have a lot of shared responsibility for controlling the security of cloud environments with our cloud service providers. And then IoT, mobile, and SaaS, there's a lesser amount of control. And so we have to think about it in terms of oftentimes policy enforcement with SaaS and how data is being used within them, or discovery of IoT and mobile connecting to your environment, that unmanaged device perspective, and controlling inbound access to your environment. So I kind of think of it in terms of coverage as well, and what impact do I have and what level of control do I have. And then I think about prioritization in terms of operational excellence, meaning I want to make sure I'm operating what I have in it at the highest standard, and I'm earning the right to innovate, right? So I think sometimes organizations, they go, oh, I want to have a zero trust strategy. Well, have we earned the right to innovate there? Are we doing identity governance really well? So
Yeah.
I kind of think of prioritization in that way as well.
Got it. Well put. Is there a specific framework you use as you think about these priorities, like a NIST CSF or something, prevention, visibility, governance across different threat vectors? What framework typically comes to mind when, as you think about, you could do a million things, but you got to prioritize the top 5, 10 things? How, what are some of the tools and frameworks have you used?
Yeah, absolutely. NIST cybersecurity framework is the language I tend to speak, but I also am responsible for understanding the various control frameworks as well. So I always, first thing, like to make sure I have a unified control framework. I've mapped out how all the controls relate across the various compliance frameworks. So, for example, in my current role, we're very SOC, ISO, and FedRAMP heavy. And so understanding those frameworks at a deep level and understanding where maybe FedRAMP is more stringent, like understanding how I need to apply controls to meet FedRAMP versus meeting SOC or ISO is really important.
I know, and you mentioned zero security. I also know you're very passionate about zero security and also now app security at SailPoint. In fact, you had mentioned that that was one of the reasons why the top security job at SailPoint was very, very attractive to you. Let's start with zero trust first. What does it mean, and how should enterprises be thinking about operationalizing zero trust?
Yeah, zero trust, I feel like, is a buzzword we had been hearing for the last decade, but it's only
Right.
kind of emerged out of the fog
Yeah.
to take shape over the last couple of years. um,
Yeah.
and so I think that what zero trust means is that you're moving away from a perimeter based security strategy, right? To where you try to kind of build a moat around your castle to an identity based security strategy. So, understanding each role and the identities within that role and what access to what data that they need and the risk inherent to those data accesses. This allows you to create trust boundaries based off of the identity, the role, and the data access requirements. And so that's holistically what it means, but it really takes four key underlying principles to get there, right? First, you need to not trust, always verify. You need to enforce least privileges, and that's something we've been talking about for a long time. And it's the basics of identity governance. But there's a lot of cool ways now with technology to make sure we're always doing analysis to enforce that least privilege, right? By observing underused access, for example. And then the third is just in time access. So we're seeing a lot more progress in just in time access, specifically in the cloud space. I think it's still a little bit more aspirational to have just in time access for the entire enterprise. But the thought of having just in time access or even just in time identities is really where the future is going with zero trust. So that's what those basic tenets: always verify, least privileges, continuous monitoring of those least privileges and the way the identities are using their access, like the behavioral traits of their access, and then the just in time access. I think where everybody can be paying close attention to with regards to zero trust architecture is NIST Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. Last year in May, President Biden issued the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity.
Yeah.
And one of those requirements issued to government agencies was to adopt a zero trust architecture. So NIST Cybersecurity Center of Excellence is working with top vendors across the field, SailPoint included, to define what that architectural best practice should look like. And so keep an eye out for that effort.
And just a small follow up on that one. How do you see the IT team or the CIO and CISO kind of collaborating and making zero trust happen? Because that's the relationship that's also been talked about a lot. Any point of view on that?
Yeah, Identity Defined Security Alliance they do an annual report. And on that report, published most recently last year, I believe August timeframe, they had some key statistics on that illustrated that CISOs are taking a much more active role in the identity program, right? Historically, we saw this program aligned to the help desk within IT. Now, CISOs are recognizing that in order to keep up with the times and move away from this perimeter based architecture to identity defined or zero trust architecture, they need more influence and, in some cases, control over the identity program itself.
Speaking of buzzwords, another one that's top of mind is supply chain security. I recently came across a startup who shall not be named. They claim to have a blockchain based zero trust supply chain security. I almost fell out of my chair when I read it. But speaking of supply chain security, I think one of the other things that top of mind for a lot of practitioners now is the role of DevSecOps and shifting security to the left. Can you share your perspective on this sort of security and DevOps partnership? How do you view that world, especially in cloud, but even regardless of cloud?
Yeah, what I have found is that shifting to the left is a lot less about tools and a lot more about relationships. So, in order to fully shift to the left, security needs to be involved in the design phase. And in order to accomplish that, you have to have strong enough relationships to, one, have partners want to engage with security, and two, leaders gain leadership support for policies requiring it, right? And earning that support takes a strong relationship where business leaders know that security is balancing the needs of the business. So I do see some cool ways that tech is enabling shift left, though. The move to codifying security with security as code like really fascinates me. And then another thing that just excites me in general about DevSecOps is that there is still so much room to be a trailblazer in that space. All the best practices are not yet defined, but I am paying close attention to Google's SALSA framework, or supply chain level for software artifacts, which is their framework for ensuring the integrity of software artifacts throughout the software supply chain. And once again, that's just another example of an emerging best practice we see in a field that's being shaped right now, and we're a part of it. So it's really exciting.
And what's your take on the security budgets that are moving to centralized security teams, to DevOps and engineering team? Right now, most of that budget rolls under the CISO, but as the landscape is evolving, the budget, should it get centralized or should it stay split?
In my opinion, as long as architecture governance is in place and effective, who's paying for it doesn't really matter to me. However, a lot of this budget actually used to sit in IT. And now that companies are moving cloud costs to engineering and DevOps, as you guys just illustrated, as well as SaaS costs being moved to the business, like parts of the businesses are purchasing their own SaaS all the time, right? It makes the old ways of benchmarking cybersecurity budget very skewed. So the one impact I would highlight for security is that we have to start focusing on budgeting security based on outcomes and not tech spend.
If I understand your point of view correctly, basically the security budgets will still be centralized. It's just that the line of businesses or developers who the security teams that help will have to pony up and contribute towards that. But you don't foresee a major paradigm shift in terms of budget shifting from centralized security teams to DevOps.
Sometimes I see that in terms of like, hey, you need to build this into y'all's operational costs. So security is no longer going to foot the bill. This needs to come out of your portfolio. I don't think conversations like that are very useful. It's just kind of shuffling sand around. um, so that's just my opinion, though.
You mentioned that as a CISO, you're also tracking the FedRAMP spend and the SOC spend. I've seen that traditionally being done by, again, engineering teams. So definitely in Sailpoint, there is a amalgamation happening where the CISO organization is definitely working very, very closely, looks like, with engineering on the shift left standards as well.
I'm fortunate enough to work in an organization where we have strong enough partnership and communication that when we know a new compliance initiative is coming down, we all collaborate on what the impact to our budgets will be. And so I love that we have that open communication.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. Switching gears a little bit, there are only 3,000 security vendors in the industry. And as a CISO, you probably get inundated by everybody trying to sell you their super advanced next gen security tool. Obviously, your role at SailPoint is a little bit different, but obviously, you've been in the business for a long time. What advice would you have for these vendors to draw your attention?
Yeah, I get asked this question internally at Sailpoint also, right? Because the field teams always want some coaching. I always say that intros and practitioner referrals are the best way to get a foot in the door. So really utilizing your network. And then it's so important to position yourself as a strategic partner and not just a vendor once you do have your foot in the door, right? And so, what do I mean by that? A strategic partner doesn't just deliver like a vendor would, they invest and strategize alongside their partner. And so, coming with a how can I help approach, both once you've got established partnership, to say how can I connect you with a similar organization so you can get peer insights, how can I leverage my network to help you, how can I support your strategic planning with some of the workshops we might be able to offer, or how can I help share my expertise on the tool that we sell to ensure that you're aligned with best practices and how you're using it or your strategy. So having that how can I help and strategic partnership approach is so important. And sometimes the how can I help approach is a good way to get a foot in the door also, right? By offering a token, right? Something that you can give instead of just asking, I think is a really important thing to consider.
So let's say somebody took your advice, they got in, they're part of the mix as you are evaluating and have budgets for whatever, right? Like something outside of identity or cloud security or whatever that you have. What's the process you typically follow to evaluate different vendors? Is it a purely use cases, who is superior versus the other? Are there other, like, what do you look for to pick the winner among multiple vendors, startups, big companies? Give us a general reference so that people who are building startups or in big companies like Neelima and I can seek some guidance on how to win that multi-million dollar RFP.
Yeah. So I would say first, I'm having my team draft the functional and technical requirements at a detailed level, right? So that way we have a clear set of requirements that we're going to evaluate against. Secondly, we pick our pool of vendors to evaluate. And a lot of times that's done based off of looking around at the industry and talking to my peers, right? So although we definitely don't want to lean entirely on Gartner and Forrester analysis of the competitive landscape for whatever capability you're looking at, it's a good frame of reference to start with. And then talking to peers, right? Understanding what they're using and what they've been happy with is really, really important, because nobody gets fired for picking the established vendor that everybody's had good experience with, right? But that being said, emerging technology is an ever present thing in our field. And so it's important to keep an eye on those emerging players. And that's where relationship really comes into play, right? What kind of relationship are we looking to build, and as well as the functional requirements evaluation. And then holistically, I'm looking at how are you going to support us post sales? Like, what are your service level agreements for any tickets for support that we might have, or what will the engagement model be for us to be connected? Will I be provided a technical account manager, or will I be provided customer success? And then looking at the overall financials of the company, especially if it is a more emerging player, making sure you're entering a relationship with a stable company is really important.
So it sounds like having not only just having a great product, but also having a very good support and post sales implementation process from a success perspective is a big criteria into that. All we hear typically is about the product, but not the post sales, which is so important for the product to be successful. So with that, we are at our last question, Heather, before the rapid fire. What is the one advice you would give to others who want to build a successful career in cybersecurity like yourself?
Seems like a big ask, right?
Mhm.
To all distill it down into one, but I'll try to distill it down into a couple of pieces of advice, right? The first is do your research. Cybersecurity is an expansive field, just like that of medicine, right? Nobody says they want to be a doctor and stops there, right? They have to pick what kind of doctor do they want to be, right? Sometimes they might start as a general practitioner. Other times they may go, I want to be a specialist like a neurologist or podiatrist. And we have those same decision points to make for a cybersecurity career. And I think it matters where you decide to start. Like, if you know that you want to specialize in forensics, then you can start reaching out to other people that have that career field already, establish a mentor relationship, and get an idea of how you need to shape your skills to be successful. Or sometimes you don't know, right? You just know you want to be in cybersecurity and you're not sure. I would reach out to people anyways across multiple roles specifically in the governance, risk, and compliance space or the threat intel space, areas where you're going to get matrices exposure across the organization or exposure to a lot of different information about cyber threat actors, or those are good roles to start in because you get to absorb so much and learn so much without having a huge burden of technical expertise to overcome right off the bat. So that would be my first piece of advice. Think about what you're wanting to specialize in within cybersecurity and target finding a mentor based off of that. And then once you're in your first security role, it's so important to be customer centric. We are a cost center to the business. And so we need to recognize that we deliver a service to the business, and we need to have customer service oriented attitude when we do that. We need to reach out to our partners and our customers and understand what their needs are in order to champion mutual success, which is so much more important than individual success in the context of an organization. And that's really how you advance your career path. It's because you enable yourself to build a network of champions and mentors who will refer you and seek you out.
That's great advice.
Heather, this has been incredible. So, are you ready for the rapid fire?
I think so.
All right, let's go then. I know you grew up in a small town in Texas, I think in near Dallas. I'm assuming you're a Cowboys fan, but I'm going to ask you, what's your prediction for the Cowboys-Niners playoff game tomorrow?
My prediction
Objectively
is,
speaking.
yeah, my objective prediction is that the snacks are going to be the highlight if you're like me. But I'm going to have to say Cowboys just being from Texas, although I did grow up a Green Bay fan. So
Oh,
I'm
got it.
already a
Yeah,
cheater.
do you think they win the championship this time, Packers?
It would be nice if they did.
Yeah, they're doing really well. All-time basketball team.
Spurs, no doubt. Coach Popovich and, amazingly ethical community pillars of team members on that team. They just make me, I'm so proud of that team.
So take the best Spurs team, call it the Duncan Robinson era, and the best all-time Warriors team, which is, 16, 17, Katie and Curry and Clay. If they play against each other, who wins?
Well, I have a clear bias here. I'm going to be rooting for the Spurs. But I'll just eat extra nachos out of misery if they don't win.
Yeah, love that. If you could spend a day with a past or present leader or any individual, any famous celebrity leader, who would that person be?
I know this is not going to sound like a technology centric answer, but I would say Dolly Parton. She is a leader for
Amazing.
our culture. I think she really bridges so many different backgrounds. She talks to people in a way that respects everybody's background, and she gives back to her community and is truly selfless. So I would love to meet her.
Yeah, she's amazing. 5 years from now, which area of cybersecurity would we be spending the most time on? Those of us who are in security. 5 years from now, and identity is off limits.
Okay. Um, Goodness, I would say probably it depends on what business you're in. I am excited to see it that if blockchain becomes integrated into how we do security over the next 5 to 10 years. So I don't know that this will be the case, but I think there's some amazing opportunities for us to start talking about blockchain throughout so many security controls.
Yeah, love it. The industry did next gen, milk the next gen for last 2 decades. Sounds like the next 2 decades, you can add a prefix blockchain based firewall, blockchain based identity, get VCs poured in hundreds of millions of dollars in your startup. All right. And the last question, what are you most optimistic about in 22?
I'm really optimistic about how much we've all learned about working in this new working world and us coming together through these shared challenges we've experienced through the last 2 years. I feel like empathy is so heightened, like you were talking about earlier. And I'm excited to grow closer with my teams. I'm excited to celebrate wins with each other. And I'm excited to help support each other through the difficult times teams like we've really learned how to do over the last couple of years.
That about wraps up this segment of our episode. Heather, it's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy professional with a family. For you to spend an hour out of your busy schedule on a Saturday, we don't take it for granted. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for doing this and for inviting me. And I wish you all a happy new year.